Jimmy Stewart once let slip that the smell of burnt hydraulic fluid still drifted through his dreams. Hollywood applauded the gentleman hero, but a darker flight log hid in his silence. 20 combat missions, flak-torn and blood-braced, flown by a man who refused to crash in public long after VE Day. He could have stayed in Burbank polishing Oscars. Yet Jimmy Stewart rode a daylight coach to the Army Induction Center in February 1941 with a sandwich tucked in his pocket for ballast. At 32, he weighed 138 pounds, 5 short of the Air Corps minimum. Studio cooks pushed double cream milkshakes. Friends wagered roast beef dinners. Stewart sat on a staircase gulping malt syrup between takes of Ziegfeld Girl. When the scales finally nudged past 143, he told a sergeant, "I may be light, but every pound wants to fly." Reporters called his enlistment a publicity stunt. Stewart refused interviews, insisting on basic trainee anonymity. He donated his MGM bonus to the Red Cross and asked the studio to lift contract clauses that would recall him during war. The wait ordeal proved resolve. Slim or not, Stewart had logged 400 civilian flight hours, and the Air Corps needed calm instructors. Hollywood had birthed a genuine pilot whose first battle was with a bathroom scale. Stewart's boyhood home in Indiana, Pennsylvania, shook to passing freight trains, yet dinner talk always climbed into thin air. His grandfather piloted hot air balloons at county fairs. His father flew Curtiss Jennies in 1918. Young Jimmy built balsa models in the hardware store basement, inhaling pine shavings and kerosene. Years later, he told a cadet, "Our family sells nails, but we keep eyes on the sky." Each sortie would test whether he honored that smoky lineage. When orders sent him to Moffett Field, a telegram from his father read, "The store keys stay under the register, but your conscience stays under your flight jacket." Stewart folded it into his logbook. Family pride gave lift and drag. It fueled grit during bombing drills, yet amplified guilt for every casualty report. Ancestral fabric stretched to the edge of tearing. The Army hid its famous recruit by listing James J. Smith at morning roll. It worked until Liberty weekend, when townsfolk spotted the lanky gait from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Stewart sighed. Guess the cat flew formation. Back in barracks, anonymity returned through routine. He scrubbed latrines, then ranked 5th on celestial navigation exams. An instructor noted, "Listens first, then flies." Rumor claimed MGM offered the base a projector if he got lighter duty. He declined, volunteering for a night instrument. Sortie through heavy fog. The examiner wrote, "Steady, no drama," cementing credibility among recruits wary of movie luxuries. Moffett's fog smelled of salt and axle grease, and when engines cut, his heart kept spinning, a tremor he would later label stage jitters. His bunkmate, a Texas farm boy named Red Benton, later joked that Stewart's footlocker contained more paperbacks on aerodynamics than dress socks, and that the captain read them by flashlight under mosquito netting, whispering equations as if practicing bedtime prayers. Those muttered numbers lulled Red to sleep night. Assigned to the 4045th Bomb Group in England, Stewart first met the consolidated B-24 Liberator under drizzling Norfolk skies. He tapped the plexiglass nose with the same knuckle he once used to knock on studio doors, marveling that a quarter-inch of curved transparency would soon shield 8 men from 8 millimeters of German flak. Pilots derided the Liberator as the flying boxcar, yet Stewart admired its blunt utility. "No close-ups," he joked, "but she delivers her lines." On a frigid December 1943 shakedown flight, cabin heat failed and frost feathered the instrument panel. He traced a target circle on the glass and announced, "Gentlemen, the show must go on." He drilled crews on engine feathering and fuel transfer checklists until muscle memory overrode fear. One gunner recalled, "Captain Stewart never raised his voice. He'd just say, 'Let's try that again, partner,' and you wanted to get it right." Even so, every takeoff felt like stepping onto a stage without rehearsal. The Liberator's Essius. Vibrations mimicked applause that never ceased, binding his Hollywood identity to the thunder of Pratt and Whitney engines. On April 13, 1944, Stewart led the 703rd Squadron toward Schweinfurt, Germany's ball-bearing citadel already. Notorious from the carnage of Black Thursday, haze blurred contrails into a dirty sheet overhead, and radio chatter snapped with warnings of 88mm flak stacking like murderous applause. Midway to target, a waist gunner shouted that No. 3 engine belched oil and fire. Protocol allowed turning back. Stewart keyed the intercom. "Boys, we're flying on." Mechanics later counted 72 shrapnel holes in the Liberator, yet the formation stayed intact, releasing ordnance that crippled bearings for months. The sea cost echoed in empty bunks. 2 crews failed to return, and Stewart spent dawn writing condolence letters, slipping a spent .50 caliber casing into each envelope. Historian Donald Miller credits the mission with hastening the Allied advance into Bavaria. More quietly, it etched a sight that ricocheted through Stewart's nightmares, ball bearings tumbling like silver hail through smoke. Statisticians later calculated that an 8th Air Force bomber crew in 1944 faced a higher chance of death than a Marine storming Iwo Jima. Yet the men of Stewart's 703rd consumed 45 gallons of coffee a day and kept morale alive with a homemade trivia game called Flak Facts, wagering chocolate rations on questions like, how many pounds of rivets in a Liberator? Correct answer, 730. The absurd arithmetic of survival tasted somehow like burnt joe and powdered milk. Between sorties, Stewart hunched over a wooden desk, rolling lucky strikes so that tendrils of smoke scented the thin V-mail sheets bound for Indiana. "The sky today looked like broken china," he wrote, "and for a minute I feared we'd shatter too." To mask tremors, he gripped the pen with both hands, an early sign of what clinicians now call hyperarousal. He never named it aloud, calling it the shakes. One letter included a pressed violet, another carried a single ball bearing from Schweinfurt. Family kept them until 1983, when the Air and Space Museum placed them beside Stewart's Oscar. Silencing tourists in mid-stride, private dispatches drew no audience applause, yet they preserved the cadence of a man oscillating between cinema myth and cockpit mortality. Promoted to operations officer of the 405th 3rd in early 1945, Stewart coordinated missions using H-2X radar that painted cloud-shrouded cities in ghostly green. Crews called the specially equipped B-24s Phantoms because they often launched under radio silence and returned after sortie lists closed. Briefings took place in a hut lit by a single red bulb. Navigator Charles Marshall recalled Stewart erasing hand-drawn maps mid-sentence. "If you can't remember this map by heart, you won't need to remember it at all." The line sharpened focus more than any caffeine. Radar raids devastated. Synthetic oil plants in Brucks and opened corridors for daylight bombers. Declassified logs show crews led by Stewart scored an 18% higher bombs-on-target rate than group average. Night after night, ghost green echoes of cities flickered, then vanished. Stewart later said, "That equipment shows the beating hearts of towns, and then we stopped them." Victory parades rolled in 1945, and Hollywood reclaimed its leading man. Stewart arrived at Union Station to gardenia perfume and reporter shrieks, then slipped to a bungalow where insomnia dug trenches in his cheeks. Roommates noticed he wedged a chair under the doorknob before sleeping. Thunder over Griffith Park sent him diving, cracking a lamp shaped like a Liberty Bell. He patched it with airplane glue, saying it symbolized the knot you tie when things are broken. The VA labeled his symptoms nervous exhaustion. He channeled survivor's guilt into George Bailey's bridge rail plea in It's a Wonderful Life. Director Frank Capra admitted Jimmy's tears in that scene were not scripted. They were triggered. The nomination came, but Stewart left the ceremony early. Neighbors heard his Beechcraft Bonanza idling at dawn, escape velocity toward clouds that felt safer than red carpets. Remaining in the Air Force Reserve, Stewart rose to Brigadier General and piloted a B-52 on a classified 1966 reconnaissance over North Vietnam. Crew Chief Hal Doremus recalled, "He walked aboard in civilian clothes, but the moment he took the left seat, he was Colonel Stewart. The cabin smelled of ozone from early infrared scanners. Over Haiphong, surface-to-air missiles rose. The actor general murmured, 'Steady, boys, whispers travel far.' Post-sortie, he exited through an enlisted mess hall, signing only flight manifests. The Air Force used his presence for morale but allowed no publicity, preserving the fiction that he stayed home polishing awards. Each late mission layered memories on the old ones, reel upon reel of unscreened footage playing on a loop only he could see. At a 1984 reunion, Stewart lingered beside the scarred nose panel of his Liberator. A young captain asked how he coped with fear. Stewart looked at the flak-torn aluminum and whispered, "You don't. You just carry it until it sets you down." The phrase sped through veteran circles, stitched into Squadron patches, yet mainstream press ignored it. After his 1997 death, biographers mapped the timeline. 20 combat missions, classified flights, decades of sleeplessness disguised as script study. The whispered sentence became a retroactive diagnosis, proof that Hollywood's most reassuring voice had trembled in the dark. Stewart never flew another combat sortie, but the weight he spoke of finally landed among listeners willing to name it trauma instead of weakness. Bomb bay doors yawning over rolling fields, frost crackling on plexiglass, ball bearings raining through smoke, violet petals taped to V-mail, a radar screen glowing green ghosts, a cracked Liberty Bell lamp, white, missile trails streaking a tropical sky, and a whisper beside battered aluminum, all flicker like frames from a reel running too hot. Yet the pattern resolves into one truth. Jimmy Stewart flew not to polish his legend, but to defend men whose names the marquee never lights. He carried their echoes inside every pause between his silver screen syllables, masking restless turbulence with folksy charm. When you next hear his drawl in a Christmas rerun, remember the prop wash behind it and the nights he sat awake, counting invisible casualties. If this story found your imagination at cruising altitude, tap the like button, subscribe for more untold histories, and drop a comment telling us which hidden chapter in aviation you want cleared for takeoff next.